Hi there! If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children, so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It is my honor that you are here. Today's episode is inspired by a wonderful conversation I had with Alyssa Decker from Equilibrium Echoes. As we were having our conversation, she asked me this question. She brought up the very fair point that we are still so very troubled by whether we are bad mothers or not. We are distraught by the worry that we might not be good moms. And she took this further by saying that we will jump at the chance to support another mom who says that she believes she is failing at motherhood. We will tell her that she's a great mother and she's doing the best she can, that it's normal that she may feel this way sometimes, that her children are so lucky to have her as a mom. But then when it comes to us, we are not as forgiving, we are not as compassionate. So what is that about? Well, there's actually a very good explanation about why this happens. Let's break it down a little bit. For one, even though we talk a lot nowadays about mom guilt and mom shame, and there are a lot of resources out there, a lot of conversations that we are having that attempt to deconstruct the topic and attempt to help us get rid of mom guilt, the point is it is still very prevalent, it's still very there, and we still feel it to our bones. And the reason for that is that societal standards about what a good mother is have not actually really changed. We still define a good mom by her self-sacrifice. We still consider moms who give up parts of themselves as being better moms. We still have that image in our head of the really blissful, happy, cheerful, playful mom at the house as the ideal that we are supposed to reach. And so what does that mean on a different level? What does it mean when we aren't that? It means we're bad mothers. When we are overwhelmed and we are exhausted and we can't be with a smile on our face all the time, when we are just too touched out and we don't want to play anymore, and we might even not want hugs anymore. At the end of the day, we just want to decompress and sit in front of the TV. We feel like we are bad mothers. And this is not an individual thing. And I think that's really important to stress. We have been conditioned to think this way about motherhood. There are very specific images out there demonstrating what good mothers must be like. And I don't think that there are enough ways to say this and enough times that I can mention it. A lot of times, being a successful person goes completely in opposition to what we are told is a good mom. And in our day and age, we're supposed to be successful women alongside being good mothers. We're supposed to balance it all. Do you see why I dislike the word balance when it comes to parenthood? It is an illusion that we can actually reach a balance, because balance means that I am able to marry two things, to put them together. Whereas a lot of things that we are expected to do as mothers are not in line with what we're expected to do as successful people out there in the world. And so this creates a lot of internal struggle and internal conflict. And so when it comes to the question of why are we more forgiving and why have we developed compassion, because let's be honest, this is progress. We are able to be compassionate with other moms when we didn't used to be. We used to be just as harsh as we are with ourselves with other mothers. So it is progress that we can take a step back and we can actually be kind to our friends and other fellow moms and tell them that they're doing a good job. However, why hasn't this started to reflect on us as well? I am going to argue that we are not truly compassionate. We cannot actually be compassionate towards someone else if we haven't developed self-compassion. And so what's actually happening is not that you're not being compassionate, you are. It's not that you're faking it, but the simple explanation is you've learned a skill. And we can rationalize and intellectualize a lot of things when they're not personal. But it's much harder to do that when it comes to ourselves, because our emotion takes over. So when it comes to my friend and she is very upset with herself about something that's most possibly an irrational standard that has been drilled in her head from a very young age, we can take a step back and we're able to say, come on, you're a great mom. And we can point out all the amazing things that she's doing. We can point to the irrationality of that expectation she has of herself. We can let her know that, yes, there are messages out there. You're not crazy, that you're expected to do this, but who has actually done it? And how feasible is it actually to ever do that? This is a learned skill. I can be in my head in that moment for my friend. I can access all the logical things to say because I know that they're logical. And that also means that I know they're logical for me too. So just the same way that I said that we can't be compassionate with others if we're not compassionate with ourselves, when you can access that logic and that rationality for your friend, it means that you actually believe what it is you're saying and you have that logic. On an intellectual level, on a rational level, you know all these things. So what happens when it is that you do something that you feel is not up to par? Why aren't you able to say these same things to yourself and have them work? For many women, sometimes it's even hard to say them at all. You can't bear to utter kind words to yourself. Why is that? While this may not be the case for everyone, for many women that I work with, what happens is that there is a very loud inner critic. And that inner critic has been developed from a very young age. Oftentimes, it's related to our inner child. So this inner critic that I talked about in the previous episode is ever present and is there to tell us whenever we have done something wrong. In motherhood, this inner critic will not let anything go. If our child is acting out, it's our fault. We must have done something. We have to figure it out. If our child is having a tantrum, it means that we've done something wrong in their upbringing. Or maybe there's something up with the way that we show up for our child. If we yell, if we feel overwhelmed, if we feel like we can't cope, if we compare ourselves to other moms and think, oh my God, why can't I handle all the things that she is handling? She's got more kids and she's got dogs and she's got all these things, but she seems to be able to do all the things and she has a smile on her face. Of course, this is an assumption we're making in our head, right? But when we see all of these things, we get very emotional and our inner critic says, you can't do it. There's something wrong with you. You are failing. Now, this inner critic is not present while our friend is talking about how she's feeling in her motherhood journey, right? And so that's your simple answer about why you can comfort her, but you can't comfort yourself. Going deeper into why the inner critic is there, though, the reason why we can't get rid of this inner critic and why the inner critic intercepts our logical center and goes straight into the emotion is because the reason it is there is to protect us. We see the inner critic as an enemy and we try to get rid of this inner critic. We try to push it away. We treat this inner critic as someone who is there and is verbally abusing us and needs to go away in order for us to be healthy. The problem with that is when you push someone away, but they have something to tell you, the only thing that you're going to achieve is that they are going to come back and they're going to push harder because they need to tell you something. Imagine that your house is on fire for whatever reason. You're wearing headphones and the fire is at the other end of the house and you're cooking and there's noise and because of the cooking you can't smell anything. And so someone is knocking at your door trying to save you. They're trying to tell you your house is on fire. You have to come out. But you're thinking, I need to cook and I've got all these other things going on. Like, I don't have the bandwidth to give you any attention right now. Maybe it's an annoying neighbor that usually comes in and annoys you and talks a lot and you can't get rid of them. And so you ignore them. You pretend you don't hear them either. And they start knocking louder. And so you close the blinds and then they try to come in. And so you lock the door. And what they do at some point, because they're trying to save you, is that they pick up a rock and they break the window so that they can come in and get you out. This is a great example of how the inner critic works. We see the inner critic as a huge annoyance, as an abuser even. And so we want to ignore them and we hope that this inner critic just goes away. What we don't realize is that the inner critic is there to protect us from something. Now, whether that something is a real threat, whether that threat is still going on or was a threat that we felt while we were children and so our inner child is still carrying it, whether it's a perceived threat or an actual threat, that really doesn't matter at all. The inner critic was created at some point in our lives, and it served a particular purpose. And the thing is that usually we haven't dealt with the inner critic the best way possible. Even if we've done some work on ourselves, that inner critic a lot of times remains unscathed because we refuse to give it any attention, or because we try to get rid of it. The problem here is that if you try to get rid of it, it's going to get louder and louder and louder, kind of like that annoying neighbor in my example before. So what can you do instead? You want to bring that inner critic and have lunch with them. You want to be able to have a conversation. You want to be able to look at that inner critic with good intention and recognize that it has good intentions for you. So just like I talk about when I refer to couples, it's really important that we address the other person from a place of trust and knowing that there is good intent. In that same way, you want to have a conversation with your inner critic and ask why it is there and what it is protecting you from. Showing it that you appreciate its presence and that you understand that what they were doing was meant to be good. You might be wondering how in the world such abusive language that you use against yourself, that the inner critic whispers in your ear all day, could actually be helpful. Because we are tribal and social beings, evolutionarily, we are wired to care about what people think. And we are wired to want to change based on the feedback that we get because we want to be part of the tribe. Back in the day when we were cavemen, not being in the tribe could mean, it almost definitely meant, that we would not survive. And so this is something that still lingers to this day. And it's no wonder that part of ourselves is going to go into criticism mode in order to save us from shame and from isolation and from being kicked out, being an outsider, and potentially risking our actual lives. Now, of course, in most cases nowadays, this is not really the case. But on an emotional level, isolation and loneliness and not having social connection does in fact lead to poor health outcomes that may end up in a decreased lifespan. So yes, being accepted and part of the group is a survival mechanism. Your inner critic started to take form sometime when you were a child and you felt threatened that you would be pushed out of your tribe. Usually, it is something that is related to our parents. Sometimes it could be something that's related to peers at school. So while in most cases this will be a perceived threat to losing the love of our primary caretakers or guardians, in some cases, the fear of being marginalized or ostracized is related to unfortunate experiences with peers in school. Either way, at some point we were made to believe that some part of us is not good enough. It's not up to par. It has to change so that we can continue to be accepted and loved and part of the group. In order to make sure of that, the inner critic was created. That part of us took on the tough role of having to put us in line. It established itself as the authority. Because what is more important than being part of your group, than being loved? Think of children. They read the world in I am loved versus I am not loved. When a parent is disappointed, recall how you were when you were children. Wasn't it just a million times more upsetting when your parents were disappointed in you rather than mad or grounding you, for instance? That's because in being disappointed, they were showing lack of emotion, and lack of emotion is lack of love. At least when they were angry, that showed that they cared. And caring can be translated into love. So just like children see everything from the lens of I'm loved or I am not loved, we have an inner child that is very much present and is still very much invested in maintaining the love of its parents, the adult self that is encompassing it right now, and the people around him or her. The profound thing that happens to us in parenthood is not just that we change. It's not just that our whole identity changes and everything in our life now revolves around our motherhood or our fatherhood role. It's the fact that we are met with our inner child as well. An inner child that is bound to rebel if we try to parent our children in a much gentler way than we are parenting it. If we were parented harshly, if we were taught that we need to keep tabs on ourselves through our inner critic in order to protect ourselves from being cast out, and so our inner critic acts as the voice of a parent who is very harsh and who is very punitive, that voice is directed toward our inner child. And our inner child has not seen much love and acceptance and forgiveness or gentleness. And so as we try to show up as different parents for our children, as we take our inner critic and we lock him or her into the darkness while we try to parent our children, the inner critic is still very much there and it wants to come out. And here is the thing, it doesn't want to come out because it's trying to win the power struggle. It wants to come out to save you, because even as parents, we worry about losing the love of our children and being accepted by our children. And so the inner critic is there telling you, are you a good enough mother? Are you showing up in a way that is going to make your parents proud, right? How many times has it been that we want to show our parents what we're doing? We don't realize it, but subconsciously, we are looking up to them to hear from them that we are good parents as well. Isn't it the case? Could it be the case for you? But it is much more concerned with maintaining the love that your children have of you. And I know that this may sound very immature. Being very honest here, it is. It is a very infantile part of us that wants to be loved. It's our inner child that is looking to be accepted. And it loses sight of the point. The inner critic is there nagging at you all the time to protect you from losing the acceptance and love of your children. The acceptance and love of these little humans that you adore so much. And so naturally, you want them to love you back. You want them to appreciate you. You want them to understand your efforts and all that you do for them. So does this put the inner critic a little bit into a more compassionate perspective? Do you see that the inner critic is there to protect you? And I hear you whisper in my ear, okay, I get it, but how do I get rid of it? You don't. You thank it for all that it's been doing for you. You thank it for that awful role it's had to play. Whenever you've had to set boundaries to your children, whenever you've had to do something that to them was the end of the world, but it was obvious that you had to do it for their safety, it was still very painful for you, wasn't it? But you had to do it for them. If you see the inner critic as a parent who was trying to do his or her best, your inner critic was trying to show up in a way that would protect you, that it would prevent others from harshly criticizing you and judging you and having a negative image of you, being quicker to judge and criticize by predicting what could go wrong and telling you that you needed to be perfect in this way or that way. If you understand that all of this had your interest in mind, you can approach your inner critic with less hatred and less anger and less frustration and actually forgive it. So if there's one thing that you want to do, and in continuing our journaling exercises, I invite you to speak to your inner critic. I know this is very similar to the exercise that I proposed last week. And if you've done it, you can just add to it. Have another conversation with your inner critic. Last week, we wondered why your inner critic might be there. So in your journaling activity, you may have come up with reasons why your inner critic had to be so harsh. Now, write a letter to your inner critic and express your gratitude for the fact that it had to play this harsh role in order to make sure that you are well off, that you are accepted, that you're part of the tribe, that you survive. And then in a second paragraph, tell your inner critic that you forgive him, you forgive her for having to be this harsh with you, for using this strategy in order to get through to you, even though it was very painful. And then recognize how painful it may have been for your inner critic to have to take on this role. And end the letter with the main theme being that your inner critic can let go of this role now. That they can be who they want to be. That they can contribute to your well-being in a different manner because they no longer have to protect you in this way. Let them know that you are stepping up as the healthy adult to reparent and protect your inner child, and that your inner critic doesn't have to step in Reassure it that you're there. Explain how you're going to do things differently. And welcome the inner critic in your life in a different capacity this time. Now, this is a profound exercise, and it is very, very impactful, but you're not going to see results overnight. Just like it would be with another person if you were having this conversation. A person who you've had a relationship with for, let's say, over 30 years and has had a very specific role in your life. You can have this heartfelt, vulnerable, deep conversation with them. They can believe you. They can trust you. They can feel relieved by your forgiveness and for you taking the load off. But are they going to automatically be able to let go of all the ways in which they approached you? I mean, it's a dynamic that has been long held. So take it one step at a time. Start noticing the little things that your inner critic is able to let go of. Note them down, continue journaling. And in time, as you keep at this and you try not to get disappointed because you're not seeing some huge breakthrough in the beginning, you're going to see how your inner critic's voice will gradually lower and lower. So going back to the question, why are we so concerned about whether we are bad mothers? Why are we so harsh with ourselves? And we keep on questioning whether we are good enough as parents. Why can we be nice and compassionate to other mothers, to other fathers, but we can't do that for ourselves? It's because our inner critic is there and it's very loud and it takes over all the logical, rational, intellectual centers. It triggers all of our emotions because it becomes personal and it becomes a matter of survival. We need to make sure that we're doing everything perfectly so that we don't get rejected, so that we don't fail the people that we care about the most, our children, our partner, and the people in our surroundings whose opinion we care about the most. When we can recognize that the inner critic has been there to protect us and we can have a conversation with our inner critic, and we can present it with ways that we are going to provide this protection differently, then our inner critic will not feel so compelled to knock on our door and break in through the window to get its point across. It will know that we are safe, and it can feel relieved in the recognition that it doesn't need to take on this awkward and mean and abusive role, really. I hope this episode has been helpful and that you've got lots of takeaways. Share it with other parents that you think can benefit from it. If you've got any questions that have come up, if you've got any feedback, if you've tried the activity and you want to get back to me, I have a dedicated Facebook group that I'm linking in the show notes. You can find me on Instagram at markella.kaplani. You can email. I am the one who reads all my messages and my emails. Feel free to get in touch. And if you've ever wondered what it would be like to bring these issues up, if you are curious about how this all applies to you and you would like to be coached, as of September, I am opening up one slot every month for a parent or for a couple to come in and have a session with me. And so you get a chance to work through certain things that you found valuable through the episodes that you've heard and you want to apply in your own life. And listeners can hear what it really is like. They can feel like they're not alone. So you're giving back in the best way possible. If you want it, I'm extending this invitation to you, my friend. You can email me and have podcast guest in the subject lines, and I will make sure to get in touch with you so that we can schedule it in. And obviously, the conversation can be completely anonymous. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you from the depths of my heart that you can find your inner critic, embrace them, and start your reparenting journey today. Your children deserve it. Your inner child deserves it. You deserve it. You are enough, my friend. Take care of yourself. See you next Sunday.